Tonight, we are so pleased to welcome Jim Lichtman. He's been writing and speaking on ethics to numerous clients around the country since 1995. His speaking engagement is so thick, I can't read them all. They're right here. His op-eds have appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Chicago Tribune, Houston Chronicle, Huffington Post, Minneapolis Star Tribune, and the New York Times. His feature stories and appearances include the New Jersey Star Ledger, the Washington Post, USA Today, Boston Herald, National Public Radio's Weekend Edition, NY1, and CNN's Newsnight with Aaron Brown. His weekly commentaries can be found on his website, ethicsstupid.com, so please visit that website. Tonight, I'm pleased to bring Jim to talk about trust and confidence. As you can see from the poster out there, it's won numerous awards already, even though it's just been out. So we're very pleased and very happy to welcome Jim Lichtman. Welcome, Jim.
Well, those of you who know me know that I talk a lot, probably too much. So tonight I got a little trouble with the voice, so we'll see what happens. In any event, I'm very pleased to see everybody here, and I appreciate it. This book is a story about integrity. It's about one person who had it and another person who believed that the end justifies the means. And November 7th, 2007 was when I first interviewed Lou Merletti in his office for 3 hours. I had interviewed him before, and he was in a small clip in my book, What Do You Stand For? And he told a sliver of his story. Now I was in his Cleveland office talking to him about the full story, and he began it like this. The way I'm going to tell you this, Jim, is exactly the way it happened. During the 1998 investigation of President Bill Clinton, independent counsel Kenneth Stark compelled Secret Service agents to testify about what they may have seen or heard regarding Clinton's relationship with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. With the help of the Department of Justice, Merletti argued that if agents were allowed to testify about anything other than criminal acts, it would compromise the trust and confidence tenet critical to protection of the president. If a president knew that agents could be revealing confidences, private information, private conversations in court, the president would push away protection. That's what was reported in news accounts. What the public did not know was that Starr relied on an anonymous source inside the service who alleged that Merletti had secretly facilitated the relationship by removing the president from the White House at night, putting him in the back seat of a car, covering him with a blanket, and then taking him to a hotel to meet with Lewinsky. The source also alleged that Clinton had a deal with Merletti. Be quiet about Lewinsky and I'll make you the next director. All of it was false. But despite no corroboration and the refusal of the source to come forward and testify, Starr and his prosecutors were focused on 3 objectives: getting Merletti to admit to the deal, Lewinsky to flip, or both. Merletti told me story after story of how Starr's investigators tried to prove their source's information. One story stood out to me, and this is the second segment from the book. My predecessor, L.J. Bowron, Merletti described. My predecessor, L.J. Bowron, Merletti described, was working somewhere in D.C. and he lived in Virginia. 2 FBI agents show up at his home and his wife's there alone. Who's there? Bowron's wife asks. We're with the FBI. I'm not opening the door. We need to speak to your husband. He's not here. Well, where is he? He's at work. We'll get him on his cell phone. We need to talk to him. Just to be clear, I interrupted, we're talking about 2 FBI agents investigating for Starr who had come to the home of the former director of the Secret Service and were speaking to his wife on the other side of the front door. Correct, Merletti told me. I just want to give you a taste of what we were up against. After learning which stop her husband was due to get off at, the agents drove over, met the former director, then ushered him into the back seat of their car. According to Merletti, their conversation went something like this. We're investigating for Starr, the first agent said. We know what happened. What do you know happened? Bowron said. We know that Merletti cut a deal with President Clinton. He would become director and remove you. The president said, don't talk about Lewinsky and I'll make you the next director. Well, that never happened, Bowron said. How do you know? Because I'm the one that convinced Merletti about being the director, and he absolutely did not want the job. The former director believed that Merletti had the essential leadership traits and pressed him to take the job. Ultimately, Merletti agreed to go through the selection process along with 15 other nominees. During his tenure as director, Merletti would frequently speak to the formers, as he dubbed them. I realized that I was the caretaker in this position. It's not about me. It's about the entire legacy of the Secret Service. I tried to glean as much information from all the formers that I could because I didn't want my decisions made in a vacuum. I always want to hear from others. So now we're back in the back seat of the FBI car. Merletti did this whole thing, an agent pushed the former director. He's the one who orchestrated your being removed. No, Bowron said. I know he didn't. Tell us that he did it. You know he did it. It didn't happen. Tell us the truth. He did this. No, you were forced out. You know you were. Finally, Bowron had enough. Look, I gave you my answer. I answered you 3 times. You're not going to ask me that question again. You're taking me home, and I'm getting out of this car. A short time, Bowron phoned Merletti and described what happened. Angered, Merletti called Deputy Attorney General Eric Holder late that same evening. Who do these FBI agents and Ken Starr think they are? Do you think for a minute that if the Secret Service was involved in any investigation about the FBI that we wouldn't contact the FBI first and tell them that we want to interview the director and treat him like he just robbed a bank and put him in the back of the car? Merletti said, you need to get to Ken Starr and tell him this has got to stop. And let me tell you something, Eric, this is not the first thing. This is probably the 10th thing that happened. It was inappropriate, disrespectful, out of line, Merletti emphasized. My point was, these guys, they're chasing shadows. There are terrorists in this country that are setting up to hit us. And this is what Ken Starr and the FBI are wasting time on? Someone gave Starr this information. And no matter what I said or what I did, he was on a mission to pursue this, to prove that this stuff was true. After receiving subpoenas for testimony, Merletti was preparing a presentation for Ken Starr. He wanted to show the independent counsel the past history of U.S. Secret Service when it had to do with agents, with agent proximity, and if agents were, if the president was subjected to an attack. He believed that Starr would understand the risk and that agents should not testify. Merletti brought up a drawing illustrating the first in a series of assassination attempts against U.S. presidents. Then he pulled out a photo that showed me that had President Kennedy in Tampa, Florida for a motorcade. President John F. Kennedy, November 18th, 1963, 4 days before Dallas. Merletti explained as he clicked to another slide with an enlarged inset showing 2 agents on the back bumper of Kennedy's limo. That's Special Agent Clint Hill and another agent on the back bumper of the president's limo in Florida. Clint Hill is well remembered as the agent who jumped on the back of Kennedy's limo in Dallas and tried to save the president. In Florida, 4 days before Dallas, Kennedy ordered agents off the back of the car. Kennedy said that the agents were creating a barrier between the people and the president. Merletti handed me another photo from the Dallas motorcade. I've never seen this, I said. No one has, he tells me. The photo shows Hill crouching down on the back bumper of President Kennedy's car in Dallas. I called Clint in. Clint, you know we're being challenged by Ken Starr. I'm trying to put a presentation together to talk about the possibility of us being pushed away. Merletti's pointed to another photo. How did you end up on the back of the president's limo in Dallas? Lou, I had hoped this picture would never come out. I'm on the follow-up car, and I know I wasn't allowed to be there. All of us knew we couldn't be there. I can't tell you what it was, Lou. A sixth sense. But something was wrong that day. I don't know if the people were too close or the crowds were too big. I didn't think the president was going to be shot. I just didn't feel comfortable. The next thing I know, I'm coming off the follow-up car and I get on the president's limo. And I know I'm not allowed to be there. So I get right off and I return to the follow-up car. Within minutes, Hill said, it's overpowering again. Something is wrong. So I come off the follow-up car again, go back to the limo. I did it 3 times. The photo you caught is about a minute before the first shot is fired. I go back to the follow-up car, and I hear it. Hill made a clapping sound with his hands. I knew right in my gut. Moving his head to the left, Hill described to Merletti, I had come all the way around, and I actually saw the barrel coming back in, and I could see smoke. I knew he was hit. I came off the follow-up car, and I'm digging in. In my mind's eye, I'm seeing a guy working a bolt, coming back down for a second shot, and then I hear it. It came from the exact same spot. The second shot is when President Kennedy goes like this. He mimicked Kennedy's hands to his throat. Now I know he's hit. With every muscle fiber I have, I'm digging into the pavement. I'm trying to get to that car. I don't know, is the guy reloading again? Is another one coming? I'm getting closer, I'm almost there. Hill claps his hands again. The president's head vaporized in front of me. I knew he was dead. Stars insisted on agent testimony would undercut protection, open the door to the likelihood of another presidential assassination. All that lived in the back of Merletti's mind as he listened to Hill. Had me and the other agent been standing on the bumper, Hill said, one of several things would have happened. Either Oswald would have had no shot, or he would have shot one of us. Or maybe he'd have a shot, but at least we would have stood a chance. Lou, don't let Ken Starr do this. We got pushed away by the president. Don't let another agent follow in my footsteps. Promise me that you'll fight this. Throughout his 6-month investigation, his 6-month battle with Starr, despite the fact that agent's testimony turned out to be a dead end, Merletti demonstrated the courage and the integrity to stand up to Starr and tell the truth, despite the consequences to his job and his reputation. Integrity is a word that we really don't hear much today. You know, we fought wars for moral reasons. We stood up against dictators for moral reasons. Today, America's at war with itself for reasons I just don't understand. We're not a perfect country, but we have always demonstrated the moral resolve to work through our differences. Lou Merletti shows us that integrity is important so that we can all become the best we can be. I think that's more important than ever.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with my throat.
A couple questions, then we'll open up
Yeah.
the audience. Jim, it sounds like this is an extensive research on your part. I was just wondering how long the whole project took you from germination of the idea to actually publishing your book.
Well, 12 years.
12 years.
It took 12 years after the first interview I had on November the 7th with Lou Merletti in his office. I became more or less obsessed to find out what's this story all about. And so I dug into research, and that began the process. And originally, Merletti and I were going to work on the book together. But then, I think I was about 30 days away from going back to Cleveland and spend the whole week with him. But then the Colombian scandal happened, in which Secret Service agents were caught with prostitutes and everything.
Yeah.
And Merletti called me up. He says, Jim, I can't do the book. The Secret Service is going silent. We're going dark. Nobody's going to be working on anything, especially a book. So I said, I want to work on the book on my own. I said, do you have a problem with that? And he said, no, just share with me anything that you discover. So I shared with him a letter that I didn't talk about this, that was signed by Deep Throat. That was the name the source used inside the Secret Service, but he was all false and everything.
Yeah.
I shared that to him and he was absolutely shocked because in the book, he was giving me his information, his story about this, And he said Starr had some inside source, some deep throat type of information. And that's when I uncovered this letter, and he was really surprised, and I asked for his reaction, and he said, I feel victimized all over again. So after Merletti stepped down from working on the book with me, that's when the research began. And I went through a special counsel report that was buried in the independent counsel files regarding the treatment of Monica Lewinsky at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which led me to more information, which led me to speak to the special counsel who handled the investigation, who was helpful in a big way in getting me in touch with the National Archives in finding her report, which had been ostensibly sealed, and finding information about the Secret Service story. And the first thing I got back from the archives was a 650-page index.
Mm-hmm.
And it went through line by line by line, and I asked Joanne Harris, the special counsel, I said, how do I go through this? And she says, you'll figure it out, but stick with the deputies involved in Starr's investigation, and you'll find a lot of information there. So it takes a long time to search the independent counsel files, to search for anything in the archives, because believe it or not, they only have a staff of like 6 or 7 people.
Yeah.
And every time you file what's called a FOIA request, Freedom of
Yeah.
Information Act request, they're supposed to get in touch with you within 22 days. Yes, we have it. No, we don't have it. But I filed a request, and I didn't know about this. So 6 months later, I contacted the guy at the Department of Justice, and he said they should have contacted you earlier. Anyway, through speaking with several people, I wound up getting Joanne Harris's report that supposedly was sealed, and it turned out it hadn't been sealed. And if I had not received that report, the whole story would have ended with my interview with Merletti. But after I got the copy of the report, I thought, well, what else am I going to find in here? And that's what began. I think I spent 5 years alone searching for everything in Starr's files about the Secret Service. And it takes a long time because they're working on other cases beside mine. But I was lucky enough to have the same archivist throughout the entire process. And after a while, he began to understand what I was looking for. And it was him who found the Deep Throat letter. And it was absolutely just as surprising to me as when I told this to everybody else. But he was a reverse Deep Throat. You know, he didn't provide helpful information. He was out to get Merletti, undermine his job. So that's how that came about. This is a story I keep telling people. This is a story that no one has heard before. It was never released at the time. In today's press, everybody would have known this. It wouldn't have been hidden. But it was never talked about except inside the Secret Service and in Starr's office. And like I said, at the end of the day, Merletti took his case all the way up to the Supreme Court, working with the Solicitor General. And at the end of the day, after agents had to testify, there was nothing there. Starr contacted Merletti in his office, and he said the Secret Service was a dry hole. You guys knew nothing. And so Merletti said, you don't understand. This is not about Bill Clinton. This is about protecting the President of the United States. We can't be drawn into a political issue. And Merletti was completely angered about this whole thing, even 8.5 years afterwards when he talked to me in his Cleveland office. So that's what the story is, and there are a lot more details in the book that go into this.
Wow.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah.
I hope I didn't sound too confusing.
Oh, we have one
I
right
have
there.
one. So I haven't read the book. Miles is almost finished. But did you have contact with Monica Lewinsky?
No.
Who was
Well, I
so
shouldn't say.
badly.
After I got the 100-page report of the investigation that Joanne Harris did on the confrontation of Lewinsky, I wrote a short piece in my website. It's ethicstupid.com. And I was contacted by Ken Gormley, the author who wrote, a book like this thick about all of Whitewater and everything that related to it. He told me I did a lot of great work, and he said, do you mind if I show this to Lewinsky? And I said, go ahead. So I never expected to hear from her. This was like a year later, and I get this email from her. I'm sorry I didn't contact you before, but I appreciate your story about me, because this is an important topic to me. I've told everybody about this confrontation, and now this report validates what I had to go through. So we exchanged emails for a few times, and then that was the end of that. Any other questions?
In response to that, do you feel, I'm
I'm
sure
sorry?
that's in response to her response, was that just vindication for all your work?
Right,
Was this-
that's right. And I did really release a copy of the report originally to the Washington Post, and they contacted Monica Lewinsky, and she said that's exactly the way it happened. And I'm glad that everybody now can see the evidence of what I went through at that time.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, Monica Lewinsky was not the only victim. It was Lou Merletti and the Secret Service, because they insisted on getting this testimony. And the biggest failure, the biggest flaw with Ken Starr is he had never been a federal prosecutor. As Harris told me, he was a brilliant law guy, a complete academic, but he didn't know how to run an independent counsel office. He would frequently make decisions by consensus, by inviting as many attorneys into the room as possible, in a conference room, 40 or 50 attorneys in the conference room. They would all share their thoughts about a different action. And then he would, ask for opinions, and he would generally go with consensus. And Harris told me, she said, the captain of the ship does not consult with the crew on how to run the ship.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's what happened with Ken Starr.
Wow. Are there any questions?
Anybody else with some questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
In talking to you, it sounded like several of the people that you used for information and that were helpful are no longer around. Was it more than one, or was it
Actually,
several?
Joanne Harris died, I think it was 2014 or so. And fortunately, I'd gotten all the information I needed from her, except for the interview memos that she did with each of the people involved in the investigation. And I kept looking for these interview memos, which really release a lot of the firsthand information that was happening in the office at the time. I couldn't find them, and she passed away, and I kept looking for them, and finally I came across those. But everything that I write in the book, up to those memos, I sent to Joanne. I said, tell me if I'm off base here or I'm leaving something out. Tell me if I've got the points right. And she vetted everything that I did, except for the memos, which were in plain English. So that was pretty straightforward. The other person who died was Michael Immick, who was one of the prosecutors in the room in the confrontation with Monica Lewinsky. And he was the person that was designated as the speaker. And, excuse me, very nice guy, very good guy, very capable, and Harris points this out in the interview. He was just out of his depth, and he went along with the consensus of the people in the office. And even though he was a lecturer in the department on ethics, and he was pushed into making the decision to go and try to prosecute her as much as possible, get her to release this information, and admit to this relationship with Ken Starr, admit to the relationship with Bill Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that came about. But Michael Immick, I almost had a chance to go down and see him. He did live down in Laguna. And I called him and I said, Mike, I want to get your perspective on this. Can I come down? And he said, I'm going in for surgery. I have a brain tumor. He said, but we'll talk in the next week or so. Well, I tried contacting him several times, and I found out through another source that he had, the surgery had been successful, but he was walking on the street, he was walking on the beach, and he had a heart attack and died. And so that's what happened to him. Was there anybody else who died? Not that I know of. But I got a lot of information out of him. He was Joanne Harris, when she completed her report, because she talks about IMIC's poor decision-making at this time, she told me, before I released the report to the Department of Justice, I called Mike and asked him to come to my New York office and read the report. And she told me I thought this was the fair thing to do. Michael told me when he read the report, he was walking the streets in New York for hours. He said, if this report is released, my career is over. And that's one of the reasons why the Office of Independent Counsel worked with the special division, the court that oversaw the Independent Counsel, to have the report sealed. And the report was sealed by the special division, but it was never sealed from the public. But this was unknown to a lot of people. This was something I followed up with extensively, and I found out from the archivist that he said there are 2 other copies of the report in the archives here. None of them are marked under seal. He said if it was under seal, it would be very clear. And so what I discovered was is the report was sealed by the overseer of the 3-judge panel, which they're allowed to do for themselves before a public record is released. But the other reports have not been sealed. But I asked Joanne, who told you that the report was sealed? And she said it was either Independent Counsel Robert Ray or the office. And that's how she was led to believe, and a lot of people were led to believe that the report had been sealed. So when I got the report, I spent all weekend in reading this thing and making a whole list of questions for her, but she was extraordinarily helpful. I couldn't have done this actually without her.
One
Any
more
other good
question.
questions?
One more question.
Oh, Ginger, a question? No.
Has
Yes.
Merletti read the book?
What's that?
Has Merletti read the book?
He did read the book. This was a couple of months ago, and the short version is he wanted to retire and just fade away from this whole story. He was really tired of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I understand that.
Yeah.
After I showed him the Deep Throat letter, I did not remain in touch with him because I wanted to wait until I finished everything else to show him about this. Everything is completely documented. This is a independent investigation that's non-political. 98% of the documents that you read in here all come from the Independent Counsel's files in the National Archives. I don't distort anything, I don't exaggerate, I just wanted to tell the story. I tried, by the way, to contact and speak to Ken Starr 4 times, and each time I was turned down. And at one point, I was telling Karen that, I think I'm gonna fly back to Waco and see if I can just walk up to him and talk to him. And I thought, what if he says no? Then I've wasted the trip.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to stress that Ken Starr was a brilliant academic attorney who studied all the details of law. But as Harris told me, he was completely out of his depth. He just didn't know how to run an independent counsel office.
One
Did you
more.
have a question?
Yeah, the last
So
question.
do you have any loose ends that you're still hoping to tie up, even though the book's been published?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you have any loose ends in the story that you still want to pursue, even though the book is finished?
That's a good question. Oh. What was it? There's nothing significant. Little bits and pieces that I've heard rumors of. I had heard a rumor that they knew this source inside the Secret Service, and I tried looking for this individual's name through as many files as I could find. I told the archivist, this is what is presumably this guy's name, and I could never find it. However, I found out from another source the name of this guy who admitted what he'd done at some conference or something. And I looked up the name. He lived in Boston. I found his home address. His brother worked for the Boston Red Sox. So I thought, the next time I'm in Boston, I'll just go on his door and talk to him. However, I had not had any cold, hard proof that he had done this, so it would have been a wasted effort.
Okay.
Richard?
Yes, I was intrigued by the consensus of 40 to 50 lawyers that he used to get his opinion figured out. Since a lot of people might think that his investigation was partisanly motivated, do you know what the composition of these 40 to 50 lawyers were? Were they focused on one side or the other, the partisan side of things? Do we
Well,
know that?
What I know is from Joanne is that there were a lot of aggressive prosecutors in there. They were all in their 30s, most of them. There were a couple that were in their 40s. This was the first time any of them had ever been on an independent counsel. And so they more or less guided Ken Starr through this process. Ken Starr looked at 311 pages of his handwritten notes. And his notes reveal he's asking questions about people during meetings. He was obsessed with the media. He kept writing notes about, why is this journalist saying this thing about me? And I thought, this is crazy. But I never found anything that showed that he was more or less making decisions on his own. But of course, I would have loved to be able to sit down and talk to him about that. Barbara?
Despite what you have in the book, did you ever get any reaction from any of the Kennedys? I mean, not the Kennedys, but Bill Clinton or Mrs. Clinton?
I tried to interview him, and no, and I wasn't surprised by that.
No.
He turned down an interview. Several of the prosecutors I spoke to, Robert Ray, didn't want to talk to it. They didn't answer. They didn't respond to any of my requests. There are 2 prosecutors that were involved that are interviewed in the book, and so I did my homework ahead of time before I interviewed them, and it was a very interesting conversation, and that's in the book.
So you have to buy the book to know the
You have to buy
conversation.
it. Well, it's a little bit more, the whole thing, I don't want to give too much away, obviously, but you have to follow the sequence of events
Yeah.
that lead up to the interviews to see how it happens. But I was really somewhat disappointed that Ken Starr didn't want to sit down and talk about this. Someone gave me his private phone number, and so I never talked to him, but I left a message on it. I said, I'm just trying to understand the facts of this, and if you could just help me out, this is research that I'm doing, I would really appreciate having time to talk to you. No response. I talked to his chief of staff. He's busy right now, but you need to contact this individual in another department. I called out a month later, he's busy. Anyway, it went 4 times like this, and he wasn't going to talk. Bill Clinton, I tried one time. I got a very nice letter back, but that was it. I also reached out to former President George H.W. Bush, because there is a small piece of information in there about him, and he had health issues and couldn't respond. But Bush supported Merletti's argument, and in fact wrote a letter to Ken Starr saying, don't do this. Don't ask agents to testify. And so that was a very interesting encounter as well. A lot of people that I talked to, and it's like a big puzzle, and you probably know this, Michael, and you're trying to put the puzzle together with all these different pieces, and it wasn't until I was into it for about 4 or 5 years that I began to see what the puzzle looked like. And I showed Merletti different segments of the book as I went along, and he validated all this stuff. But more importantly, I made sure that the interviews I conducted with the prosecutors were absolutely accurate. I did not want to misquote anybody, and as a matter of fact, one of the prosecutors I spoke to said one part, told me one detail in one part of his interview, and then later on in the interview, he said something that contradicted that. So at first I was going to put the whole interview the way it is, because this is what he said. Then I contacted him and I said, so which way is it? And he said, well, maybe I didn't say this properly, but it's this way. So I changed it. I wanted to be as fair and straightforward as I possibly could.
Final thought. Now that you have the book, it's published, you received them all. Just want to know your reaction to the work you put in, and are you able to appreciate it? And how do you feel about this finished product?
I'm sorry, about the finished
Yeah,
product?
because I know we've been trading emails, and there's a little bit of nervousness of getting the book on time. But now that it's here, I just wanted to know your thoughts and your feelings about now that it's finally here.
Well, here's my big thought. Every day, this is no joke, since 2007, I've had some to-do list of something for the book. I need to do this, I need to do that, since 2007. Tomorrow will be the first day that I don't have to think about what do I have to do next on the book. And you think I'm joking, but that's the truth.
Actually, I hate to tell you, you got to publicize
Yeah,
now,
so
that's harder
It
than
takes-
writing the
It takes
book.
an enormous amount of time.
So what are you
One
gonna
of,
do?
one of Merletti's close associates who I was in touch with during all of this was very, very supportive, helped me out with, the other 2% of the documents I used were from Merletti's personal files as director. It was just, it just was a long process. I never expected it to take this long. Who would do something like this if you knew it was gonna be 12 years?
Yeah.
So that's what it was. I just wanted to know where this story would take me. And that's what it is. Don't ask me what my next project is because I haven't got a clue. This just totally.
Ethics Stupid is your next project.
What?
It's Ethics Stupid is your next.
It's Ethics Stupid is my next book, yeah.
Well, Jim, we're very glad that you took 12 years to do this, and we thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. Jim Lichtman.